Polish language is famous for being one of the most difficult languages on earth. And on today's episode of Cult America, we are joined by a Polish teacher named Elena, who will tell us exactly why that's the case. Elena, for some context, please tell us how you came to being a Polish teacher and what it is that you do.
Hello Ryan, hello everyone. How I became a Polish teacher? Well, first of all, I'm Polish, so that's already like a good basis to be a Polish teacher. I've been teaching English for a long time, and then I just wanted some change in my life, and I noticed that there are just so many people that come to Poland now, and they love Poland and they want to stay in Poland. So many expats. In Poland, it became such an attractive place to live that I thought, why not the other way around? You know, why not teaching Polish to those people? And since I know several languages, I also speak Spanish and Portuguese, and I studied Russian at university. So it's like a good basis for me to know the difficulties of different people who come to Poland to live there. And it made it easier for me. So that's how it started, you know, slowly, just with like a few students, you know, like I taught my ex-boyfriend who was Costa Rican, I taught him some Polish as well. And it just, you know, became my business now.
Fantastic. Well, you must be an optimist, because when I wanted to learn Polish language, Polish people told me directly that I shouldn't even bother, that it would be too difficult. Fast forward a few years, and I've told this story before publicly, when I worked for Wirtualna Polska, my boss said that, Ryan, you have to improve your Polish, you're going to be fired, basically. And I went to Polish lessons, and my Polish teacher, Dorota, who also appeared on this channel, basically forced the Polish into my mind. And at a certain point, I realized how difficult the grammar is. And at that point, I actually considered giving up. Tell me, from the perspective of a Polish teacher, why is your language so incredibly difficult?
I am an optimist, that is true. And I think that even though Polish is so difficult, it is possible to learn it. Like, you are the living, breathing proof of that, right? And some of the guests that you invited to your channel, people who left their countries to live in Poland, they learn Polish, so it's definitely possible. It is a difficult language. It is one of the most difficult languages in the world. I don't know why. I think, you know, like, first of all, for sure, the pronunciation, right? It's quite crazy. I don't know, we hate vowels for some reason. We just don't want to open our mouths, right? Everything happens here, right?
But the first time that I saw the name Rzeszów, I thought it was a mistake. I thought that can't be that way.
I know, and what about Szczebrzeszyn, right? That's crazy.
Or Szczecin.
Szczecin, yes, that's true. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea why, but we just don't like vowels, right? We love consonants. Consonants are the king, you know? Yeah. And they're so nuanced, right? Because there are such small differences between, for example, z and g and j, right? And they're both written with, you know, D and Z, and then you either have, you know, like this overdot, or you have this like little, you know, dash. I mean, there are small differences. For us, it's very clear, you know, like in Chinese, for example, where you have, in Mandarin, where you have 9 tones. And for someone who is not used to that, you don't hear the difference between ma and ma, right? It's the same in Polish, but with consonants. For us, it's a huge difference if you say sh or ch. But for some foreigners, of course, you know, there's not that much difference. So that is something important, like learning the correct pronunciation. For sure. Then, of course, grammar. Grammar is crazy for several reasons, right? Of course, we have quite complex conjugation, right? The verb conjugation.
Can you tell our viewers what that is?
Yes, so it's verb conjugation is inflection of verbs, right? So basically, you have those 3 persons in singular: ja, ty, ona, ono, and then you have the same in the plural, right? My, wy, oni, one. And then there's a different form for every of those pronouns, right? So for example,
Yes.
ja, I don't know, I like, ja lubię, ty lubisz, on,
And
ona, ono lubi, etc., etc. So it's like when you learn a verb, it's always you have to learn at least 6 forms of it.
that is the precise nightmare of it. That was the thing that made me think I should forget because in my very first Polish lessons, we learned on, ona, one, and I actually thought that this just applied to, like us, them, me, him. What I didn't understand until years later is that these rules applied to every single word you speak. And on top of that, you have to add gendered words. Can you explain that a little bit, the gender of the words?
Yes, yes, the genders. That's another problem, right? Because we actually have 3 genders in Polish, right? We have the masculine and feminine and neutral, right? So that's a little bit complicated because you have to change the ending of the word, and it comes down to verbs, right? Maybe they don't change in the present tense, but for example, in the past it does, right? So if you're a woman, you have to, I was, right? You have to say byłam, right? But if you're a man, you would have to say byłem. So then, you don't have 6 forms anymore. You have 6 in the feminine and 6 in the masculine. So it just grows, it expands the amount of words that you have to learn. So it's a little bit complicated. And it's not just a verb, right? But then you have adjectives. And, if you have an adjective, beautiful, piękna, right? Piękna, feminine, piękny, masculine, piękne, neutral, right? So for example, I don't know, a child. So that also changes. And pronouns and, nouns, etc., etc. So everything in the Polish language, almost everything has a gender.
Yeah, and the thing you didn't mention about all these rules are great. Polish language loves having a lot of rules, but what they love even more than the rules are the exceptions.
Yeah. So
there are
that's
probably
the
more
thing.
exceptions
Yeah.
than there are rules. It's ridiculous.
I know, yeah, yes, you can't depend on your logic with Polish, because you can learn the endings, but then there are so many exceptions. It makes no sense, like I'm just in the midst of preparing my Polish video course, and I was just working yesterday on the conjugation where the endings in the first and the second person are ę, esz, right? Ę, esz conjugation. And that conjugation has a ridiculous number of exceptions, right? If you just take, for example, the word cat. Do you know the word cat in Polish?
Kot?
Cat, to cat.
Yeah. Oh, to catch?
To cat. Cat.
Oh,
cat.
to cut. To cut. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Witnie?
Almost. Ciąć, right? In the
Ciąć.
infinitive.
Okay, actually I didn't know that. But
Ciąć.
witnie is like cutting, but rather for food.
To cut out something, right? Witnie.
Yeah,
yes, exactly. So ciąć, right? C-I-O-Ci, right? Ciąć. But then when you want to conjugate it, it changes completely, right? Because you don't say, it has nothing to do with the infinitive form. You say, ja tnę. So ciąć, tnę. Those are like 2 completely different words. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and this is exactly the reason that I'll never be able to properly speak the language because, I'm at a place now where I can definitely communicate, even in broadcast. You can find plenty of television appearances where I managed myself in Polish. But what you can't see is the stress and the fear and the frustration of not being able to express myself. With my wife, with my brother-in-law particularly, I feel great speaking with them and I'm loose and it's nice. There are many special things about Polish, ways that you can express yourself that are not possible in English. But when it comes to these rules, I'm curious, have you ever met a foreigner who really was not a native speaker and mastered the rules and didn't make any mistakes?
No, I haven't. But it doesn't matter. Like, who cares? It's okay as long as you can communicate, and as long as like the mistakes you make do not impede the understanding of what you're saying. I think it's fine. It's okay.
Sure.
It's like with the English language. The entire world speaks the English language, but everyone has a different accent, and people sometimes make like very culture specific mistakes. Like I don't know, Spanish speakers, they have their specific mistakes that they usually make in English. Polish people, Portuguese people, etc., etc. And it's fine. Why not? Let's play with the language. It's not mathematics, it's like a living, breathing organism, and let's just have fun with it.
That's very true. And I would love to take a moment and compliment Polish people here, because I can't really recall too many situations where I was criticized or withheld from an opportunity because I can't speak proper by the book Polish. And I think in most countries, as a foreigner, not having a full grasp on the language would really, really hold you back. And I think that Polish language is intertwined with Polish pride in many regards, maybe because it's so difficult. How do you think the language affects the culture?
Wow, you're asking difficult questions, hey? How does the language affect the culture? Well, okay, the first thing that comes to my mind is, the fact that we have grammatical genders, It's something interesting because, when I observe the Western world and this whole, movement towards just eliminating gender, right? Everything is just gender equal and we're all the same and whatever, which, I don't think we're all the same. We have equal rights and we should have equal opportunities. But, for me, that's my personal view on me, right? For me, a man and a woman are different creatures, okay? And like other genders, they have also their different specifics, right? But in Polish, because we have those three genders, like we look at the world through the prism of those genders, right? Like you can't just say that, like if you wanted to make the Polish language gender equal, like you would just eradicate it because it's so ingrained in our minds that everything has a gender, right? And
Sure.
I sometimes heard some funny stories of English speakers, right? There are many Polish people who travel abroad and they work, and someone was telling me about their, I don't know, I think it was a Polish cleaning lady, that she would always say, a bottle, she, right? But she would always speak about objects, inanimate objects, as she or he, because for us it's just so natural. Everything has a gender. So I think that's one thing that for us, that it's polarized, right? That femininity and masculinity, and it would be difficult to just make it, I don't know, unisex. As it is possible in English language because of our language, right?
Tell me,
that's how the language influences the culture.
Sure, that's obviously a very hot topic. Well, in the English language, it's not one that I've particularly embraced, but I know that many, many people do. In Polish, are there movements right now to try and reinvent the language not to include gender? For example, in English, I guess people aren't calling actresses anymore, but everyone's an actor, male or female. And in English, we don't have too many gendered words in that way. But in Polish, has there been any movement to make these changes?
So this is fascinating because we have the opposite movement. So the logic behind it is the same, right? That, feminine and masculine, right? Women and men, they should be equal. But instead of eradicating genders from the language, we create more gendered words, right? So for example, psychologist, it has been for a very long time, there was just one word in Polish, which is not common because usually we have, when it comes to professions, we have,
psycholog?
Psycholog, yes.
Okay.
Very good. Excellent.
I know a few
well
words.
Done. Very good. So, psycholog, right? One of those words that we didn't have the feminine version of it, but now we do. Do you know the feminine version of psycholog?
Psychologa?
Good try.
Okay.
Very logical. It's psycholożka.
Oh, I would have never got that, not in a million years.
I know, because
Psycholożka.
yes, g and ż are related, and g very often changes into ż in some words, right? So psycholog, psycholożka, right? For example, in Norwegian, right? Norweg, Norweżka. So it's basically the same strategy was used with the word psycholog and psycholożka. And some people don't like the word psycholożka, but I think it has already become popularized and it caught on, right? So yes, there are more and more words that are created. Some words are still quite controversial, and with some words we still don't know what to do. Like, an architect, right? Architect. What to do with architect? Architektka? You can't even pronounce it, right? So with some of those words, the strategy that we use would be to say pani architekt. So you still
okay.
maintain that masculine form, but you add pani.
Sure.
But as much as it's possible, we're trying to create more feminine words, right? And there's a problem with the word przedszkolanka, which is, I don't know, do you know what is przedszkolanka?
Preschooler?
Przedszkolanka it's a kindergarten teacher, right?
Yeah, okay.
Przedszkolanka. So usually, historically, that has been a woman in Poland, right? But nowadays, there are more men who do that job. And the problem is how do we call a man who does that job, right? Przedszkolanek,
That's very interesting.
Pan przedszkolanka. So that's something that, it's still out there, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it.
The name of his job would imply that he's like a woman, basically.
Yes.
That is a very interesting paradox. I would love to do some research and find out, 50 years ago, were there any male preschool teachers in Poland? It would be a very interesting thing to study. I imagine there must have been, but if the word indeed implies that it's a woman doing the job, then something is so that is something to look into. That's very, very interesting. Are there other exceptions? So if you go to a doctor, right, it would be pan doktor, pani doktor, correct?
Pani doktor. Mm-hmm.
It's not doktorka.
Doktorka, would that work? It sounds weird, right? Because there's another word, lekarz. So you could say lekarz,
Sure.
lekarka. So lekarka works, right? But doctor, I think pani doktor is a better option.
This is a fascinating and honestly less frustrating part of the Polish language to discuss. I think that we will kind of leave it right there because I'd like to move on and hear a little bit more about what it's like to deal with foreigners as they're in the process of learning your fantastic language. So you're a Polish teacher, and
Yes.
as long as we're speaking about genders, are most of your students men or women, I wonder?
Men. They're mostly men. Men who, but that's just, an accident, right? There are some women as well. And I also teach Polish now, mainly via social media, right? My Instagram page is my main platform. And when I look at the statistics, there's 55% men, 45 women. So it's more or less, it's balanced, right? But actual private students, they're mostly men. And there are people, from different walks of life. There are people who have some kind of Polish ancestry, and just like you yourself, right? A lot of Americans, and they want to reconnect with that part of their identity. There are expats who live in Poland from different parts of the world. There are people from Ukraine or Kazakhstan or also from Brazil. I have a Brazilian student who lives in Poland, in Krakow, and he wants to improve his Polish. Just people from all over the world.
The reason that I ask you that question is because when I announce to people that I've moved to Poland, the response is generally always, you met a girl, you moved there for a girl. I'm proud in a sense that my first love in Poland was Poland. I came here for my heritage, and I found the lovely lady afterwards. And I'm certainly very, very happy that I found her, but it wasn't my motivation. This stereotype about foreigners coming to Poland, to find love, do you see that as a theme with people who'd like to learn Polish?
Um, you know what? I think it is a little bit of a theme. I think it's, yeah, it happens quite often, but not always, right? Sometimes people, sometimes it's a surprise because they come here for other reasons, right? They come here for business, and then they discover, the hidden treasure of the beauty of Polish women. And that becomes another aspect to consider. But yes, definitely, I would say so that there are a lot of men who come to Poland, and if even if that was not their main reason, it becomes something that
Sure.
is an attractive factor for them.
Of course, that's human nature. You could move to any country and you'll find love. So I think, like, yes, Polish women in particular are special. I stand by that. But it's also human nature when people travel, when people explore. That's part of the adventure sometimes, of course.
Yeah.
Now, you've been teaching Polish for the past few years. When I started back in the early 2000s, my very first lesson was a cassette tape that I got from the Chicago Public Library. I was actually learning in secret because Polish people were like, "Don't even try, it's impossible." But later when I pursued courses, there actually were not that many courses available. Not many people were looking to learn the Polish language. How has that changed with time as Poland has developed? Is there a strong demand for that? Are there many foreigners who'd like to learn?
Yes, I think so. And there are a lot of books actually, right? Because I have quite a few books that I use for, to create my course, etc., to create, my content for Instagram. So there are a lot of books, and I think there is a strong demand. I mean, of course, not as strong as for English or Spanish or Italian, all those different languages that people love to learn, but I think it becomes, stronger and stronger. And of course, like with the refugees now, they are learning Polish, and there are a lot of Ukrainian teachers who teach Polish via social media as well. So that's
Oh.
that's also interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I think Ukrainians have an advantage of learning Polish because Ukrainian is much closer than English, for example. Actually, I've heard that for a Polish person to learn Ukrainian or a Ukrainian person to learn Polish, that like with highly intensive lessons, this could be done in a matter of a month or two. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think so. I don't know if a month or two. That's quite rapid, right? But the languages are very similar, very similar. I studied Russian as well, and Russian is a little bit farther apart, right? If you, as a Polish person, if you have never learned Russian, I don't think you will understand. But with Ukrainian, you will. You will. Like two people who have never learned each other's language, one Ukrainian, the other one Polish, they can have a conversation and understand each other.
So tell me, if one is looking to learn Polish, where should they start and how should they proceed?
They should start with following my Instagram page.
People in the comments are asking about that. So where can we find you on Instagram?
Okay. Oh yes, they can find me on Polish with Elena on Instagram. That's my main platform. Also on TikTok, and I just, also created a channel on YouTube like 5 days ago, so they can also find me there.
Fantastic.
But yes, Instagram is my main platform.
Fantastic. Well, your videos are very entertaining. They're not typical dry, like painful Polish lessons, but from what I see, you really offer people simple, useful terms that can get them started. I'm also curious, how should people take on the grammar? In my opinion, it's impossible to learn.
Step by step. Step by step. And with the grammar, the thing is that you don't really need all of that, at the very beginning, right? Like there are, for example, now I'm preparing this Polish course, right? And the declension, right? The lovely cases that we have when it comes to nouns, right? That a noun is not just one noun, right? If you say a cat, right? Kot. Mm-hmm. It's not just kot, because kot can become kota, kotu, kotem, etc., right? So it changes, but you don't need all of them at the start, right? There are some words, for example, I don't know, let's say butter, right? Masło. Like you need masło, and probably you need only the instrumental, masłem, right? Bułka z masłem, the bun with butter, right? Bułka z masłem. you don't really need all the other cases. So like, don't get overwhelmed and intimidated by all those different cases and all those different ways of conjugating, etc., because not all of it is always in use, right? We don't use that many words and that many forms in everyday language. I think of course, the easiest way to learn Polish, any language, is to be in the country, right? But not
Without a
everyone can do
doubt.
that,
Yeah.
right? Because then you're just exposed to it every day, and you hear people repeating the same words. I don't know, for you personally, when you lived in Poland, what were some words that you just heard all the time and you picked them up easily just through, like, hearing and conversations?
Probably most of the words that I know. I told my wife in the past that words kind of birth themselves. Like, I'll just have a new word in my head. I might not even know what it means. Recently, I learn a lot. If I watch HBO or some streaming service, I'll actually turn on Polish captions and read along. This is kind of one of the ways that I learn at the moment. But immersion is certainly the way to do it. Sometimes it sounds like my grammar is better than my understanding of the grammar actually is, because I parrot what I hear. So it's not that I understand the correct structure that's supposed to be implemented, but I've heard it 10,000 times, and hence I can kind of repeat it in that context. But I'm dyslexic, so reading is not like my forte, but I have a friend, Patrick Ney. You should check out his videos if you haven't. And when he reads in Polish, it's brilliant. I mean, he has a real gift for reading in the Polish language, and because he reads in Polish, his speech is much better, his understanding, his vocabulary, everything is better. So if people are literate, I think that reading could be a good expressway to embracing it.
Absolutely. I actually watched your interview with Patrick, and I was really impressed with his Polish, and he creates, like, he wrote that poem in Polish. So I think that's really, really impressive, and another proof that it is possible to learn Polish even when your base language is English, which is completely different, right? Because it's a completely different thing when your base is, I don't know, Spanish or Portuguese, where you have conjugation. Maybe you don't have declension, but you have conjugation. It's not such a foreign concept. But English and Polish are just so far apart, right? So I'm always impressed when English speakers learn Polish, because it's amazing.
All of us who have learned Polish are grateful for that sense of admiration or gratitude from Polish people for having learned the language, but I really do look at it as an obligation for someone who's moved to Poland, if you want to be a part of the society and community, for the simple purpose that if you can understand other people in their own language, you can actually know who they are in a much deeper and more meaningful way. And this allows you to be a bigger part of the society. And so I would wish that anyone who came here undertook that challenge, at least to the point that they could understand what other people are saying. And I think they'd really find Poland to be a sincere and sometimes dramatic place. Sometimes
dramatic.
Sarcastic.
Why?
And sarcastic too. I find Polish to be very dramatic, very sarcastic at times, which amuses me very much. I think it's an intense language. I'm a big fan of Polish music, the band Myslowice, for example, and the way that they phrase the lyrics doesn't really carry over into English. It has to be heard in Polish for it to stab you in the heart. This is just my impression. And the same could be said, for English songs going into another language. It's just a specific honesty about hearing someone in their own words. So with that, I think we should bid farewell. Do you have any last words to the audience, where they can find you,
Yes, I'm just very grateful for, thank you so much for having me. It was so lovely to talk to you. And I'm just so happy that there are so many foreigners learning Polish, and so many foreigners choosing to live in Poland. It's amazing. As for the audience, right, guys, if you're learning Polish, of course, I have a channel, right? I have my Instagram page, so please follow me there. I'm preparing a course. If you ever interested in starting with Polish, even if if you haven't started yet. So that's something to consider. But of course, there are other things that you can do, right? There are many books, and just as Ryan said, like try to watch movies in Polish or with Polish captions and listen to music. Just expose yourself as much as possible. Find channels on YouTube where people talk about something that interests you in Polish, because that's another thing that you can do. What else? Well, reading Polish, right? Reading is also amazing, and especially poetry and novels. So yes, there are so many things that you can do to learn Polish. And people like me, Polish teachers, there are so many of them on Instagram and on YouTube. Like, we can help you with that as well.
Elena, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. It's always interesting to speak with an expert on topics like the Polish language that, quite frankly, require an expert to understand. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for what we do next.